At 4:30 in the morning on October 16th, 1793, Marie Antoinette woke in her cell at the Conciergerie prison to prepare for death. The woman who had once commanded the most magnificent court in Europe now occupied a damp stone room barely large enough to contain a narrow bed. Her hair, which had turned completely white during her imprisonment, was shorn short by the executioner's assistant before dawn. She dressed in a simple white chemise, the only clothing deemed appropriate for a condemned traitor, and waited for the cart that would carry her through the streets of Paris to the guillotine. But the journey to that cold October morning had been far more brutal than the blade that would end it. The months Marie Antoinette spent imprisoned after her husband's execution subjected her to humiliations designed not merely to punish, but to systematically destroy every vestige of her former identity as Queen of France. From Versailles to the Temple Tower. On the morning of August 10th, 1792, revolutionary forces stormed the Tuileries Palace, where the royal family had been confined since their failed flight to Varennes the previous year. As cannons fired and the Swiss Guard died defending the palace, Marie Antoinette fled with her husband, King Louis XVI, their 2 children, and the king's sister to seek protection from the Legislative Assembly. The Assembly provided no protection. Instead, they voted to suspend the monarchy and imprison the royal family in the Temple Tower, a medieval fortress in Paris that would become the family's prison. The temple represented Marie Antoinette's first experience of genuine captivity. Gone were the hundreds of rooms at Versailles, the elaborate court rituals, and the deference that had structured every moment of her life since she arrived in France as a 14-year-old Austrian archduchess. The royal family occupied 4 rooms in the tower, their movements monitored constantly by guards who took pleasure in demonstrating that former queens deserved no special treatment. Marie Antoinette, who had never dressed herself without assistance from court ladies, now performed her own domestic tasks under the watchful eyes of men who called her the Austrian woman and made crude jokes about her fate. Despite the confinement, the family maintained some semblance of their former life during the first months at the temple. They ate meals together. Marie Antoinette taught her daughter, Marie-Thérèse, needlework and history. Her son, Louis Charles, whom royalists considered Louis XVII after his father's execution, played with a few toys the guards permitted. These small normalcies would not last. On January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine. Marie Antoinette learned of her husband's death not through official notification, but through the black mourning clothes the guards wore the next day, a cruel revelation that gave her no time to prepare for the news. The king's execution marked the beginning of Marie Antoinette's complete isolation. The guards separated her from her son in July 1793, removing the 8-year-old boy from his mother's care and placing him in a locked room below hers. Marie Antoinette could hear her son's cries through the floor but could not reach him. The revolutionaries had decided to re-educate the boy, teaching him to denounce his mother and forget his royal heritage. They forced him to sing revolutionary songs and wear the red cap of liberty. Witnesses later reported that the separation from her children, particularly her son, affected Marie Antoinette more profoundly than any other aspect of her imprisonment. She aged visibly in the weeks following the separation, her hair beginning the transformation to white that would be complete by her execution. Was Marie Antoinette an innocent mother, or was she using her children to gain sympathy? Are we supposed to feel sorry for a woman who let her people starve? Share your thoughts in the comments. The transfer to Conciergerie. On August 2nd, 1793 at 2 in the morning, guards roused Marie Antoinette from sleep and informed her she was being transferred. They gave her minutes to gather her few possessions before leading her down the tower stairs and into a carriage. Marie Antoinette later learned she was being moved to the Conciergerie, a former palace turned prison that served as the antechamber to the guillotine. Nearly everyone transferred to the Conciergerie went to execution within days or weeks. The transfer represented the revolutionaries' decision to proceed with her trial and death. The cell assigned to Marie Antoinette at the Conciergerie measured roughly 12 feet by 10 feet. A small barred window near the ceiling admitted minimal light and air. The walls wept with moisture, creating a perpetual dampness that soaked into the thin mattress placed on a simple wooden bed. A screen provided nominal privacy for the chamber pot, though the guards frequently accidentally moved or knocked over the screen. 2 gendarmes remained in the cell with her at all times, watching her every movement day and night. They made no pretense of discretion, commenting on her appearance and bodily functions with crude familiarity. The physical conditions of the Conciergerie accelerated Marie Antoinette's physical decline. She suffered from hemorrhaging, likely uterine bleeding exacerbated by the stress of imprisonment and poor nutrition. The prison provided no sanitary napkins or clean cloth for managing menstruation. Marie Antoinette improvised with torn pieces of her chemise, changing them as best she could under the constant observation of male guards, who sometimes made lewd comments about her condition. The blood stained her clothing and bedding, visible evidence of bodily processes that earlier etiquette etiquette had rendered invisible through the ministrations of ladies-in-waiting and frequent changes of elaborate gowns. Her diet consisted of prison rations supplemented occasionally by food sent by sympathisers whom the guards sometimes permitted to provide meals. She ate little, her appetite destroyed by anxiety and the constant nausea that accompanied her physical deterioration. Witnesses who saw her during this period reported that she appeared decades older than her 37 years, her face gaunt, her skin grey, her eyes hollowed by sleeplessness and weeping. The transformation from the vibrant queen portrayed in earlier paintings to the broken woman in the Conciergerie occurred over months of systematic degradation, designed to strip away not just her title but her very humanity. The trial and its obscene accusations. On October 14, 1793, Marie Antoinette appeared before the Revolutionary Tribunal for her trial. The proceedings represented justice only in the most cynical sense. The verdict had been determined before she entered the courtroom. The trial existed merely to provide a thin veneer of legality to her execution. The charges against her range from the political to the absurd. She had conspired with foreign powers against France, she had depleted the treasury through extravagant spending, and she had orchestrated the violence of the early revolution to maintain royal power. Marie Antoinette defended herself with remarkable composure against most charges, denying the accusations and pointing out the lack of evidence. She had been given no time to prepare a defence, no access to documents or witnesses who might support her claims, and legal counsel appointed only the day before the trial. None of this mattered to the outcome, but her dignity in responding to political accusations demonstrated the remnants of her royal training in maintaining composure under pressure. Then, Jacques Hébert, a radical revolutionary journalist, introduced an accusation so vile that it shocked even some of the revolutionaries present. He claimed that Marie Antoinette had committed acts of incest with her own son. The accusation relied on statements extracted from the 8-year-old Louis Charles through means that remained unclear but certainly involved coercion and manipulation of a traumatized child separated from his mother and threatened by adult revolutionaries. The courtroom fell silent as Hébert detailed these accusations. Marie Antoinette, who had maintained relative calm throughout the political charges, stood and addressed the women in the courtroom's public gallery directly. "I appeal to all mothers present," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Is such a crime possible?" The women in the gallery, many of whom had come to jeer the former queen, found themselves moved despite their revolutionary fervour. A mother's appeal to maternal instinct transcended political ideology. Even Robespierre later reportedly criticised Hébert for making accusations that generated sympathy for Marie Antoinette rather than hatred. Were the revolutionaries justified in making up this lie? After all, she had ruled them with propaganda and deceit for years. Does a lie deserve a lie, or are there some lines that should never be crossed? The tribunal dismissed her emotional appeal is irrelevant to their predetermined verdict. After a trial lasting 2 days with sessions extending into the night to exhaust the defendant, the jury deliberated for an hour before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. The sentence was death by guillotine, to be carried out the next day. Marie Antoinette heard the verdict with no visible reaction, her face a mask of exhausted resignation. She had known the outcome before the trial began. The only question had been whether she would maintain her dignity through the humiliating process, and in this she had succeeded. The final night and the letter. Marie Antoinette returned to her cell at the Conciergerie knowing she had hours left to live. In those final hours, she composed a letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elisabeth, the king's sister, who remained imprisoned with Marie Antoinette's daughter. The letter, written by candlelight in the early hours of October 16th, reveals Marie Antoinette's state of mind as she faced death. She wrote of her children, expressing anguish at leaving them orphaned and begging Elizabeth to care for them as her own. She forgave her enemies, stating that she bore no hatred toward those who had condemned her to death. The letter demonstrates Marie Antoinette's attempt to find meaning in her suffering through Christian resignation and maternal concern. She asked that her children not seek revenge for their parents' deaths, hoping to spare them the burden of hatred. She expressed particular concern for her son, asking that he be taught forgiveness, and warning that seeking vengeance would only perpetuate the cycle of violence that had consumed France. The letter never reached Madame Elizabeth. Revolutionary authorities intercepted it, and it remained in government archives until after Elizabeth herself was guillotined in 1794. As dawn approached, executioners came to cut Marie Antoinette's hair and bind her hands. The hair cutting represented a practical necessity for the guillotine's blade to function properly, but it also carried symbolic weight as a final humiliation. Marie Antoinette's hair, once dressed elaborately with feathers, jewels, and the towering styles that characterized Versailles fashion, had already turned white from stress and poor nutrition. Now it was cropped short like a common criminal's, the locks falling to the cell floor as physical evidence of her degradation. The executioners bound her hands behind her back, denying her even the dignity Louis XVI had been granted of having his hands bound in front. The cart to Place de la Révolution. At 11 in the morning, Marie Antoinette was led from her cell to the prison courtyard where a cart waited. The cart itself constituted a deliberate insult. Louis XVI had been transported to his execution in a closed carriage, a minimal concession to his former status. Marie Antoinette was placed in an open tumbril, a common cart used to transport criminals to execution, fully exposed to the crowds that lined the route. Taking the king in a closed carriage but the queen in an open cart, was this just sexism, or did Marie Antoinette actually deserve more hatred? Maybe Louis was just a passive puppet, but Marie was the real mastermind. Who was more guilty? Let us know what you think in the comments. She wore the simple white chemise in which she had dressed that morning, now soiled from the prison cell's filth. Her cropped white hair was uncovered, making her visible to everyone who wished to stare at the former queen reduced to condemned prisoner. The route from the Conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution, where the guillotine stood, measured approximately 2 miles through the heart of Paris. The journey took over an hour as the cart moved slowly through streets packed with crowds who had come to witness the spectacle. Revolutionary authorities had encouraged Parisians to attend, declaring the day a celebration of justice against tyranny. The crowds responded with jeers, insults, and crude songs mocking the woman who had once been their queen. Some shouted that she deserved worse than the guillotine. Others threw refuse at the cart, though the guards prevented any missiles from reaching their prisoner. Marie Antoinette maintained rigid composure throughout the journey, sitting upright in the cart with her eyes fixed ahead, refusing to acknowledge the crowd's abuse. Witnesses reported that she appeared completely detached from her surroundings, as though she had withdrawn into some internal space where the mob's hatred could not reach her. This emotional removal represented her final act of defiance, a refusal to give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing her break down in fear or plead for mercy. She had been stripped of her crown, her children, her dignity, and her life, but she retained control over her emotional response to her execution. The cart's journey concluded at the Place de la Révolution, where the guillotine stood on a raised platform surrounded by thousands of spectators. The executioner and his assistants helped Marie Antoinette descend from the cart, her bound hands making the movement awkward. As she stepped down, she accidentally trod on the executioner's foot. Immediately, reflexively, she said, "Pardon, monsieur, I did not do it on purpose." The apology, directed at the man who was about to kill her, struck witnesses as both absurd and poignant. Even facing death, Marie Antoinette's court training in politeness asserted itself, demonstrating that some aspects of identity persist beyond any humiliation. Was this politeness real, or was it one last manipulation? Was she playing the role of innocent, suffering mother? Could someone who allegedly said, "Let them eat cake while her people starved," really be this gracious? Which was the real Marie Antoinette? I need your honest take below. The executioners led Marie Antoinette up the steps to the guillotine platform. The climb proved difficult with her hands bound behind her back, and she stumbled once before reaching the top. At the summit, the executioner positioned her before the wooden frame. Marie Antoinette looked out at the crowd one final time, seeing thousands of faces staring back at her with curiosity, hatred, satisfaction, or in some cases a disturbing excitement at witnessing death. The executioner and his assistant forced her to kneel and positioned her neck in the wooden lunette that would hold her head in place for the blade. The guillotine mechanism was designed for efficiency rather than spectacle. Unlike the prolonged strangulations of hanging or the uncertain outcomes of beheading by sword, the guillotine promised swift death through the falling blade's weight and sharpness. From the moment Marie Antoinette's neck was positioned to the moment the blade fell took less than a minute. The executioner released the blade mechanism, and the weighted steel descended through the wooden guides with a rushing sound that ended in the wet impact of metal through flesh and bone. Marie Antoinette's severed head fell into the basket below the guillotine. The executioner's assistant retrieved it by the hair and displayed it to the crowd, walking around the platform so spectators on all sides could see that the former queen was dead. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, celebrating the death as though it were a theatrical performance rather than a human execution. Someone shouted, "Vive la République!" and the cry was taken up by thousands of voices. Marie Antoinette's body was removed from the guillotine and placed with her head in a wooden coffin. Both were taken to the Madeleine cemetery and buried in an unmarked grave, denying her even the dignity of a marked resting place. The aftermath and the children she left behind. Marie Antoinette's execution did not end her family's suffering. Her daughter, Marie-Thérèse, remained imprisoned in the Temple Tower, kept in isolation without knowledge of whether her mother or aunt were alive or dead. She would not be released until December 1795, part of a prisoner exchange with Austria. Her brother Louis Charles remained in his locked room, subjected to abuse and neglect by guards who treated the young boy with casual cruelty. He died in the temple in June 1795 at age 10, likely from tuberculosis exacerbated by the horrific conditions of his imprisonment. imprisonment. Marie Antoinette never knew that her son would follow her to the grave within 2 years of her execution, dying alone in the same tower where he had been taken from her arms. Who is responsible for Louis Charles' death? His mother or the revolutionaries? If Marie Antoinette had just listened to the people's demands, her son wouldn't have died at 10 in a prison cell. Is a mother's love enough of an excuse, or did she drag her child to his death? The revolutionaries who orchestrated Marie Antoinette's trial and execution justified their actions as necessary political violence against an enemy of the Republic, yet the specific cruelties visited upon her, the sexual accusations, the public humiliation, the systematic destruction of her maternal role, exceeded what political necessity required. These actions revealed a gendered dimension to revolutionary violence that targeted Marie Antoinette not merely as a political figure but as a woman who had dared to exercise power and influence. The revolution's treatment of the Queen demonstrated how political violence against women often incorporates elements designed to punish perceived violations of gender norms alongside political transgressions. Historical assessment of Marie Antoinette has shifted dramatically since her execution. Contemporary revolutionary propaganda portrayed her as a monster of depravity and political conspiracy. Later royalist accounts sanctified her as a martyr who died with dignity despite cruel persecution. Modern historians attempt more nuanced evaluations that acknowledge both her political failures and the excessive brutality of her punishment. She made poor political decisions during the early revolution, resisted necessary reforms, and maintained correspondence with Austria that could legitimately be termed conspiratorial. Yet none of these political errors justified the false accusations of incest, the deliberate humiliations of her imprisonment, or the separation from her children designed to maximize her psychological suffering. The guillotine's false mercy. Revolutionary authorities promoted the guillotine as a humanitarian improvement over previous execution methods. The blade severed Marie Antoinette's head in a fraction of a second, offering mercy compared to earlier execution technologies. But this technical mercy obscures the cruelty that preceded the blade's fall. Marie Antoinette's execution occurred not in the moment the guillotine severed her neck, but over the months of imprisonment that systematically destroyed her identity, health, and will to live. They took her children, her dignity, her privacy, her health, reducing the former queen to a trembling woman who could barely walk by the time she climbed into the execution cart. The revolutionaries tortured her for months, then said, "Quick death is mercy." Didn't Marie Antoinette do the same to her people, living in luxury while condemning them to slow starvation? Is that more humane? Which is crueler, slow hunger or a fast guillotine? Drop your answer below. The scaffold represented the culmination of degradation that treated Marie Antoinette as a symbol to be destroyed rather than a person to be punished. Revolutionary authorities understood that simply executing the queen would create a martyr. They needed to humiliate her first, to demonstrate that monarchy itself deserved no respect. The months of imprisonment served this symbolic purpose. Marie Antoinette's trial exemplified show trials that violated principles of fair procedure and proportionate punishment. Her suffering contributed to developing international norms against cruel and degrading treatment of prisoners. Yet we must be careful not to allow sympathy for her fate to obscure the legitimate grievances that fueled the French Revolution. The monarchy caused genuine suffering among France's poorest citizens. Her personal extravagance contributed to the fiscal crisis that destabilized the regime. Condemning the cruelty of her execution does not require defending the regime she represented. The final image comes from a sketch by Jacques-Louis David as she passed in the cart to the guillotine. Intended as propaganda, it instead captured a gaunt, aged woman with a resigned expression, already dead in spirit before the blade fell. The revolution had destroyed a human being who suffered losses that exceeded any legitimate punishment. Final question. Was what happened to Marie Antoinette karma? Did someone who ignored millions for luxury deserve to be ignored the same way? Or does no one, no matter what they've done, deserve this kind of end? Join the conversation in the comments. Sometimes the blade falls in seconds, but the real execution takes months. If you found this story as haunting as I did, hit subscribe. History's darkest moments deserve to be remembered. See you next time.